Thank you so much for the very kind invitation to come over and to share with you. Really appreciate being here. At my age, I appreciate being anywhere, actually. It's very good. I want to bring you a message out of a series that I did in Gateway a few months ago. I took the words of Jesus from Matthew chapter 6, verse 26, where he said, "Consider the birds of the air." And I did a series over 4 weeks called Biblical Bird Watching. And I talked about some of the birds of Scripture and the lessons that they could teach us. In the book of Job, chapter 12, verse 7, he says, "Let the birds of the air teach you." And when Jesus said, "Consider the birds of the air," the Greek word for the word consider is quite an intense word. It doesn't mean just have a quick look and then move on. It's observe them. See if you can learn some lessons from them. Martin Luther once said, "Let the birds be your theologians. We have as many preachers and teachers as we have birds in the sky." So over the 4 weeks, I took a different bird each week and kind of shared the lessons that we might learn from them. And what I want to do with you this morning is take one of those, and it's the lessons that we can learn from the sparrow. So I'm reading from Matthew chapter 10, passages that you'll be very, very familiar with. But Matthew 10, verses 29 through 31 says, "Not one sparrow," what do they cost? 2 for a penny, "can fall to the ground without your Father. And the very hairs of your head are all numbered, so don't worry, you are more valuable to him than many sparrows." And the parallel passage in Luke chapter 12 says, "What is the price of 5 sparrows? A couple of pennies? Not much more than that, yet God does not forget a single one of them. And he knows the number of the hairs on your head. Never fear, you are far more valuable to him than a whole flock of sparrows." So in Matthew's portion, you can get 2 sparrows for a penny. When you get to Luke, you can get 5 sparrows for 2 pennies. Now, I'm not that particularly good on maths, but it should be 2 sparrows for a penny, 4 sparrows for 2 pennies. There's an extra one thrown in. My granddaughter would say, "What's this, girl maths?" Actually, what it is what we used to call, I haven't heard this for a long while, but we used to call it a baker's dozen, where if you went to a baker and ordered 12 buns, they would always throw an extra one in. And here we have an example of a baker's dozen. The sparrows, so cheap, the cheapest things or cheapest food you could buy in the marketplace, equivalent to less than an hour of a working man's wages. So clearly these birds aren't worth much, and yet Jesus says not one of them is forgotten by God. And Jesus uses the lowly sparrow to speak to us about their value and our value in his sight. Now, Jesus uses here what we call an affirmatory argument. He moves the argument from the lesser to the greater. So if God cares for the lesser, the sparrow, then clearly and certainly he will care for you, the greater. God doesn't forget or devalue a single sparrow. How much more will he not forget or devalue you? So, as I say, the sparrow speaks to us about our worth in God's sight. Now, what I want to do is put a comma in the biblical text for a moment and give you a bit of an ornithological lesson on sparrows. Okay, we're all very familiar with our sparrows. If we've got a picture of them, there we go. You've all seen the lowly sparrow. Let me note a couple of points. Number one, their distribution is worldwide. Sparrows are ubiquitous, the most common of all land birds. So the first observation is that sparrows are very ordinary, very common, and therefore not regarded as being particularly valuable. The Egyptian hieroglyph based on the sparrow reflected that lack of importance. The Egyptian hieroglyph had no phonetic value at all, and it was used to indicate something very small, very narrow. So firstly, distribution worldwide. Secondly, they're drab little creatures. The plumage is unmemorable, grey, brown, monotonous. Compare the sparrow to the paradise tanager. There we go. Apparently, the colour of the paradise tanager is due to chemical pigments that interact with light on a molecular level, absorbing white light and then radiating these wavelengths of brilliant colour. Absolutely no comparison with the poor old sparrow. Actually, in ornithological circles, sparrows are known as LBJs. Now, people of my generation, when you hear LBJ, you'll probably think of the president that took over after President Kennedy was killed, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and we all just knew him as LBJ. Well, LBJ has nothing to do with Lyndon Baines Johnson. LBJ stands for Little Brown Jobs. So that's what they're known as. Not only are they dull in their plumage, they have a very bad reputation. They've been called mice with wings or vermin that fly. They are considered aggressive, impudent, and peevish. And in the English language, when we describe someone as a cock sparrow, we're metaphorically speaking of somebody who's a little bit arrogant or impertinent. Through the centuries, sparrows have been universally despised. In the 18th century England, sparrow clubs were formed with the express purpose of killing as many sparrows as was possible. In Russia, there was a time when people could get their taxes lowered by bringing the heads of dead sparrows into their equivalent of the IRD department. In the US in 1800s, the state of Michigan paid a bounty of 1 cent per dead sparrow. And in Mao's China, war was declared on the sparrows. Farmers were paid to kill as many as they possibly could because it was believed the sparrows were pinching the harvest. Now that policy brought sparrows to the brink of extinction, and it backfired terribly because the result was so few sparrows meant that the insects that they normally fed on multiplied beyond what anybody expected and were partially responsible for a massive fail in the harvest. And it was called the Great Famine, and it took over 30 million Chinese lives. Fourthly, the poor old sparrow is very unmusical. One of the most unmusical birds of all. In fact, they don't even have a song. There you have it. Sparrows. Common, boring, badly behaved, can't sing. They remind me of a cricket player. The commentator said, can't bat, can't bowl, can't throw. It seems that these birds are completely without any redeeming feature. An 18th century French naturalist summed it up by saying, the sparrow is extremely destructive, its plumage entirely useless, its flesh indifferent for food, its notes grating to the ear, its familiarity and petulance disgusting. You do think that if Jesus wanted to make a comparison between the value of humans to a particular bird, he might have chosen one a little more exotic. Why not a paradise tanager? No, he chose the sparrow. As despised and valueless as sparrows are, counted in men's eyes, Jesus says, not one of them falls to the ground without the Father. That passage in Matthew 10:29, are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and not one of them shall fall to the ground without your Father. When we tend to hear that passage or even read it, we read it as it won't fall to the ground without the Father knowing, or it won't fall to the ground without the Father's will or consent. But actually in the Greek, it doesn't say that. It just says it falls to the ground with the Father. And I think that's deeply suggestive. Death was never his intention or his will. It was never the purpose of God. And for every death, whether it's a sparrow, whether it was his friend Lazarus at whose tomb he wept, or whether it is the most insignificant of saints, death is an intrusion. It's an enemy. And where it occurs, something happens to the Father's heart. And when the sparrow falls in death, the Father's heart falls with it, grieving, saying, it was never meant to be like this. Jesus' argument proceeds, as I said, from the lesser to the greater. If I feel that way about the sparrow, how much more do you imagine I feel that about you? You know, when it comes to we humans, in attempting to assess our value and worth, it seems to me that there are 2 continuums, 2 extremes of the continuum that we tend to go to. At one end, we have those who cherish inflated, exaggerated ideas about their own importance. We call them narcissists. A narcissist cherishes illusions of grandeur, and he's always, or she is always thinking and talking about themselves. Others are only considered in terms of how they relate to and further the aims of the narcissist. At the other end of the spectrum, there are those who are prisoners of crippling inferiority, imagining they are unwanted, unloved, rejected by all. They're always comparing themselves unfavorably with others and are constantly depreciating themselves, considering themselves to be utterly valueless. Two ends of the spectrum. Actually, in the book of Romans, the J.B. Phillips version says, don't cherish exaggerated ideas of yourself or your own importance. Try to have a sane estimation of your own capabilities. Neither of those two extremes constitute a sane estimation of your capabilities. Now, I suspect that while it's well documented that narcissism is on the increase in our culture, most people, it seems to me, tend toward the other end of the spectrum. We imagine ourselves much more as sparrows than as paradise tanagers. And words like dull, boring, drab, unmusical, ungifted seem to be an accurate reflection of how we imagine ourselves to be. Now, without doubt, social media has exacerbated those feelings for many people. We look at Facebook profiles and end up comparing the worst of ourselves with the very best that other people post online. We know the sad truth about our dull, drab lives, and how can we possibly compete with those exotic holidays, Photoshop pictures, doctored and bolstered CVs that the paradise tanagers put up online? All of us have this inbuilt need to feel valued, to feel as if somehow we are significant to somebody and that our lives do matter in the cosmic scheme of things. And so for some people, we attempt to achieve and secure that value, that worth, that identity by the things that we acquire in life. If we can just acquire enough resources, enough money, then we'll be of value. And all of us know that pursuit is a dead-end street. It doesn't necessarily stop people going down it, but we're all aware it's a dead-end street. And numerous studies have shown that no matter how much people do manage to accumulate, no matter what income bracket they finally find themselves in, the ideal amount is always 20% more than they are presently getting, no matter what bracket they fall into. And trying to establish your worth or your value by acquiring things, whether it be money or toys, is like trying to quench thirst by drinking seawater. It's a dead-end street. Other people imagine that they might be able to achieve a degree of recognition and notoriety and thereby prove to everybody they're valuable. So I must be valuable because people treat me as if I am. And we live in a celebrity culture where this is found on every street corner. If I can just get that job, that promotion, that position in the team, that partnership, that degree, that doctorate, then people will somehow know I'm valuable. For others, it's physical attractiveness that makes them feel valued and worthwhile. If I can just look like a supermodel or have abs like Sonny Bill Williams, then surely people will know I'm valuable. So it's what I acquire, what I accomplish, what I look like. Building your self-esteem and value on those things is absolutely futile. And the book of Ecclesiastes calls it vanity of vanities. You know, my 1960s generation saw the futility of our parents' pursuit of things, and we decided en masse that we would reject their materialism and we would go out and find our authentic selves, hence the hippie movement that many of us were part of. It seems to me that same impulse for finding our authentic selves seems to have something of a resurrection in the present generation, and authenticity seems to be such a buzzword. And I hear people saying, I must find and then express those deep subterranean feelings and desires that are really me. And if I can do that authentically, then I know I'll be really of value. And to such people, I want to find myself asking, what evidence do you have that there are deep subterranean levels in your personality? Maybe you're just shallow. And if there are deep levels, how do you know those deep streams aren't just as contradictory and fickle as the ones on the surface? You know, I've heard people over the years saying, I'm going off to find myself. To those on such a pursuit, I promise you disappointment. If you don't find yourself, you'll be disappointed. And if you do, you will be disappointed. You know, in our postmodern culture, many people are suggesting that we shouldn't waste time searching for our identity, our value, and our worth. It's not something to be found, it's something that we should create. That we should be whatever we want to be. You are whoever and whatever you say you are. Sheer say-so makes it so. And we are seeing the lunacy of that philosophy and ideology outworking around us as we speak. You know, if you feel like you have value in claiming you're a cat, then a cat you are. In my daughter's school in Auckland, she had a whole group of students who called themselves furries, and they responded to the teacher with meows. In a school just nearby where I live, the school has erected scratch poles and put out dirt boxes. Truly. When I first heard that, I didn't believe it, but I asked one of the teachers, and they said that's absolutely true. You can create your own value. You know what? If there's value in claiming you're a cat, they say you are a cat. I recently heard a mother saying that her son said he was a cat, and because he said he was a cat, she treated him as a cat. He got sick, so she took him to the vet. And it was here reality collided with illusion, because the vet refused to treat him because he said, I'm not an expert in human anatomy. Now, you'd think that that would make the mum think twice, but no, she was thinking of suing the vet for discrimination. We live in a crazy world. Can I suggest to you that none of those things, none of those will establish worth and value. Acquisition, public acclaim, physical beauty, pursuing authenticity, or self-creation. They're like building sandcastles in the sky. The only firm foundation to establish the value and worth of human beings comes out of a Judeo-Christian worldview. There is no other. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, it says, God spoke, let us make human beings in our image and make them reflecting our nature. And it's that passage that is the underpinning of all talk about human value, and human rights. It rests right there. Reject that and you have no solid way of establishing human worth. After that passage in Genesis 1, this whole idea of being made in God's image occurs twice more. It occurs in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. Whoever sheds human blood by humans, let his blood be shed, because God made humans in his nature, reflecting God's very nature. The reason murder is wrong is because human beings are made in the image of God and are intrinsically valuable. Our image-bearing capacity confers on us a respect, a value. Murder deprives the world of a unique source of knowledge about God. It's the destruction of a godlike being. The only other time that phrase occurs is in James chapter 3, verse 9, where it says, with our tongues we bless God our Father. With the same tongues we curse the very men and women made in his image. You know, each of us has intrinsic value, and we are called to recognize and respect that in every other person. Don't destroy people physically or verbally. Don't be deceived. How you treat the image is how you treat God. If there's one thing that you can take away from this morning, take that away. How you treat the image is how you treat God. Now, you might imagine yourself, perhaps other people as well, to be mere sparrows, dull, boring, drab, annoying little LBJs. But those LBJs, you and they, are made in the image of God and therefore have a value that firstly is absolutely unearned. It is conferred on you by God's creative purpose. G.K. Chesterton, the great English writer and wit, observed the difference between construction and creation is that a thing constructed can only be loved after it's constructed, but a thing created is loved before it exists. As God's creation, we are loved and valued. We don't have to construct with accomplishments value. When our value is grounded in God's creative purpose, we can work from that secure foundation. It isn't something we have to work neurotically for. We already have it. And that realization, that revelation can save you from workaholism, from codependency, and from a whole lot of other addictions. You don't work for it, you work from it. Secondly, not only is this value unearned, it's also unlosable. Now, I know there's no such word, but like most preachers, I'm addicted to alliteration, so I made that one up, okay? You know what it means. It can't be lost. All other foundations can be swept away and are at best temporary, whether it's wealth, status, recognition, relationships, physical beauties, strength, it all can and ultimately will be lost. But when God confers value on us, it cannot be taken away. It may be hidden, others may not see it or acknowledge it, but God does. Nobody thought Lazarus lying at the rich man's gate was valuable, but at the end of the story it was him that was in paradise and not the rich man. Nobody thought the thief on the cross was of any value either, but at the end of that story it was him that was in paradise with Jesus. It's this idea of conferred value that has launched 1,000 Christian missions. Hospitals, education, social initiatives. You think of the Order of the Missionaries of Charity, Mother Teresa's Order of Nuns, who worked on the streets ministering to the dying of Calcutta, reaching out to people for no other reason than they were made in the image of God. Malcolm Muggeridge, the famous BBC presenter, once spent a day with Mother Teresa going around the streets of Calcutta, and at the end of the day he said to her, "I wouldn't do what you do for all the money in the world." And she smiled back at him and said, "Neither would I." How you treat the image is how you treat God. Idol worshippers know this. The idol isn't their God, it's a representation of their God. But they know how they treat the image is how they treat God. And that has massive implications for you and I. How we treat people in the fields in which we function and serve. The value of every human person must be the first principle in our ethical behavior as followers of Jesus. Whatever field you work in, from health to real estate, from education to church work, from youth work to justice to police work, the value and worth of people has to be foremost in your considerations, because how you treat the image is how you treat God. You know, I've noticed, and I notice it in church life as well, there's a tremendous temptation to mistake means and ends when it comes to our interaction with people. People are often viewed as the means to our personal ends, whether that be wealth, notoriety, or status. They are valuable as long as they serve my purposes, my dreams, and my goals. I want to tell you there's something broken and perverted about that. People are not the means to an end, they are the end, because they are the image of God. And how you treat the image is how you treat God. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 5 puts it this way: whoever mistreats and ridicules and mocks the poor insults their maker. That's why, by the way, the Apostle John said it's impossible to declare that you love God while at the same time hating someone who's made in his image. So it's unearned, it's unlosable, and number 3, it's universal. The one who created us all values us all equally. And you know what? If we could understand that and embrace the truth, the world would be a very different place than it presently is, because racism wouldn't exist. Children would be valued and not abused, and women would be honoured and not exploited, and the celebrity would not have value above the cleaner. You know, one of the things I so loved about my wife was her heart for people that others were tempted to bypass. And I remember probably a year ago going into a building. We were looking at this particular building with the possibility of purchasing it, and we're in that process right now. But we went through it at night as a group, and there was a cleaner cleaning away, and as I walked by, I said hello to him and moved on. Karen came along and just immediately, as always, engaged this man in conversation. Where are you from? He was an Indian. What city are you from? And she found out what city he was from and got somebody else in our group who had been to India and been to that city, and they're chatting away, and I'm sitting in the car probably 10 meters away listening to this conversation, thinking, come on, sweetheart, come on, you know. And she then goes on and says, do you have family here? And I knew where this was going because it's gone this way before, okay? And then she says, well, what do you do at Christmas? because he had no family. Would you like to come to our place for Christmas? She didn't even know him. And most people go by the cleaners, go by the janitors. They're non-existent. Jesus never, ever did that. He gravitated to the powerless, to the marginalized, to the despised, to the lepers, to the tax collectors, to women. The church that does not identify with the marginalized will ultimately be marginalized. I recently read about a Russian man who always stopped to buy flowers from the poor woman who was selling them, trying to eke out a living. And when the woman would ask, "What flower would you like?" he would always respond, "I'll take the one that nobody else wants." God absolutely loves us and other LBJs, the sparrows, and we must too. And as I finish, would you remember, how you treat the image is how you treat God. No more, no less. Let me conclude with this famous quote from C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors. It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest, most uninteresting person, the LBJ, that you can talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as that you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long, we are, in some degree, helping each other to one or other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and the circumspection proper to them that we should conduct all of our dealings with one another. All friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals with whom we joke, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. How you treat the image is how you treat God. Cheers.